Hi everyone, this is Deb and welcome back to our course on Word 2019. We're now down to section 6 where we're going to be talking a lot about tables and how you can use them in your documents. So really all I want to do in this opening module is to introduce you to a table and show you how you can work with the table and some of its functionality. So you can see I have a document open here. It's called tables.docx. And I have a very simple table in here, and tables are made up of columns and of rows. So you can see here I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 columns and 1, 2, 3, 4 rows running across. And what you also have in a lot of tables is a table header row, and you can see that I have one here, and that just contains the labels so you know what's in the rows beneath or the columns beneath. So I just want to show you a couple of little tricks with a table. Now, when I'm clicked inside a table, you'll notice a couple of things. As soon as I click inside, I get this additional ribbon at the top here, which says Table Tools. Now, this is what we call a contextual ribbon, which means that it only appears when it's needed. So when I'm clicked inside my table, Word thinks, okay, she's working in a table. I'm going to give her all of the tools that she needs in order to work with that table. And you can see here, if I click on the Design tab under Table Tools, I have lots and lots of different things I can do to my table. This is related to the formatting of the table or the look and feel. And I also have a Layout tab, which allows me to do things like delete the table, insert rows and columns, split the table, so on and so forth. So just be aware of that. You'll notice if I click my mouse outside the table again, those ribbons disappear. So I no longer have access to Table Tools because I don't need it. I'm not currently clicked within the table. Now, another thing you'll notice when I click in the table is you'll see I get this little crosshair icon in the top left-hand corner. And this kind of serves a couple of purposes. If I click on it, it's going to highlight my whole table, which can be very useful. And it's also what I can use if I want to move the table. So if I want to move the table to a different location in my document, I can just click and drag on the crosshair and move it up and down. And I could, if I had text in this document, I could position it so that the text flows around the outside of the table. So that's sort of a quick way of being able to move your table around your page. Another thing that's useful to know when you're working in tables, if I just click in this first cell just here and use my tab key, that will move me across to the next column. And I can carry on doing tab just to move across, which is really handy if you're doing some editing. Now, it's worth pointing out when you get to the last cell of the last row, if you press your tab key, it's going to give you an additional row. Now, that's great if you do want an additional row, and a lot of times that's a really useful feature. But if you don't, just bear in mind not to press tab, otherwise it is going to give you another row. Now, I'm just going to undo because I don't need that row at the moment. And of course, as you can imagine, I can go into here and I can make any edits that I want to make. So maybe I just want this to say sticky note instead of sticky notes. Another thing you can do in tables is essentially add formulas. So again, you might be used to working with formulas in Excel, but not so much in Word. And we actually do have a formula in this table, and that's a formula that's working out the total. So this is doing the order quantity multiplied by how much each order is. So in this case, 15 multiplied by 152, and that gives me my total. And I'm going to go through with you in later modules how you can work with formulas and add them into your table cells. So that's it. That's just a very quick overview of some of the functionality of a table. Now we're going to move into creating our own tables from scratch. So please join me in the next module for that. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Word 2019. We're down in section 6 and we're taking a look at the wondrous world of tables. And we've just seen a brief overview of some of the functionality, but now what we're going to do is we're going to create a table from scratch. And there are a couple of different ways that you can do this. So I'm going to show you one of the ways now and also show you a little bit more functionality with regards to tables. So I have a blank document here. And I'm just clicking my mouse at the top of that document and I'm going to go straight up to the insert ribbon. And remember, everything is kind of categorized onto these ribbons. So anything that you're inserting into your document, you're normally going to find on that insert ribbon. And you'll see in the second group we have the tables drop down. Now this will present us with a grid-like structure, and all you need to do is if you just hold your mouse, you don't even need to click, if you just hover your mouse over, you can select from the grid how many rows and how many columns you want in your table. And you can see as I do that, I'm getting a live preview in my document. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do 5 by 3. And once you're happy with it, just click your mouse once and it will insert that table in. So really nice and easy. Now again, as we looked at in the previous module, because I am actually in my table, so my cursor is flashing in that first cell, I now have my Table Tools ribbon, that contextual ribbon that's only visible when you need it. And it's currently showing me the Design tab, and we're going to really get into these tabs as we go through this section. Now, one thing you might notice is that when you do insert a table in this way, there's no blank space above the table. So if I wanted to put like a title for my table, I don't have anywhere where I can click because the table's in the way. Now, this used to be a very perplexing problem for me. I used to kind of drag the table around and it was all a bit fiddly. But now I've discovered a little trick on how you can actually add an additional row or an additional space above your table so that you have room for a title. Now you need to make sure that you're clicked in the first cell before where the first character would be typed. So for me, that's just there. And then just hit the Enter key on your keyboard and magically we get a little bit of blank space at the top. So I now have room to type in a title. So that's just a little quick tip for you there. Now when it comes to inputting data into your table, I'm just going to click in that first cell. And normally you will have the first row as what we call a header row. So this is really where you type the labels so that everybody knows the kind of information that you have in the rows below. So I'm going to add some information in here. We're going to have date ordered, and I'm going to press my tab key to move across to the next cell. I'm going to have item name, tab again. I'm going to have stock number, tab. We'll say quantity ordered, and finally amount each. And it's worth noting, as I've tabbed to move across, you can also do the reverse by doing Shift Tab, and that will move you back. So Tab and Shift Tab will allow you to move through there. I'm going to press Tab again to move on to the next line. And let's just input in some data into here. So I'm going to say 01/12/2018. Tab, and our item is sticky notes. And we're going to say our stock number 2152, quantity ordered is 15, and the amount each is $1.52. I'm going to press the tab key, and we're going to do 05/01/2019, and we're going to say that this is a leather bound yearly planner. Now notice what's happened there. Because the text that we've put into the cell is too wide really for the width of that column, it's wrapped the text around. I'm going to show you how you can deal with that in a moment. But let's just fill in the rest of the information. This stock number is going to be 8328. Quantity ordered is 2, and the amount each is going to be $17.98. So let's just go back to this one here where it says leather bound yearly planner. Maybe I want that all on one line, so it's worth noting that you can adjust any of the widths of your columns just by hovering your mouse over the column divider, and you'll see as I do that I get that double-headed arrow, and I can just drag that column out like so, and I can then drag the rest of them to give the ones that need more room a little bit more space and get that all on one line. So just be aware that you can do that. You can adjust the widths of your columns. So there we have the start of a really nice looking table. What I want to talk to you about in the next module is how we can add rows and columns to an existing table that we already have. So please join me for that. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Word 2019. We're still down in section 6 looking at tables, and in the previous module we saw how to insert a basic table and add some text into that table. What I want to focus on in this module is just how you can add rows and columns to your existing table. Now, one thing that's really important you understand before you start to do this is how to make different selections within your table. So for example, if I want to select an entire column, I need to hover my mouse over my column until I get that little black downward arrow that you can see here just above where it says date ordered. And then when I click my mouse, it's going to highlight that entire column. If I want to highlight more than one column, I still need to make sure that I have that black down facing arrow, but this time I just click and I drag across to highlight multiple columns. And to select a row, it's slightly different. If you just hover your mouse over in the left-hand margin until you get your arrow and click, and it's going to highlight that entire row. And again, if I want to highlight more than one row, I can just drag down like so. What's also worth pointing out here is if you turn on show hide to show those non-printing characters, you'll be able to see these little markers at the end. Now, when we're in a cell, these little markers represent what we call a cell marker, whereas the ones you see outside of the table at the end, those are row markers. So they're actually really important because sometimes if you were just highlighting cells like this and not including that row marker, you don't actually have the row selected. You just have essentially 5 cells within the table, which is why it's important to make a row selection which includes that end of row marker. I'm going to turn those off for now, but I thought that was an important point worth mentioning. So what we want to do here is I want to add a new column onto the end of this table, so next to where it says amount each. So how are we going to do that? There's currently not really any space. Well, again, the first thing we need to start with is a selection, and I need to select the last column. So I'm going to hover over until I get that black downward arrow, and I'm going to click. And then I have multiple different options for inserting a new column. The first way is I could use the mini toolbar that you can see pop up in front of us there. You can see that we have a little insert drop down, and I could choose to insert a column to the right. Another way that I could do it would be to right click my mouse, and you'll see that I have an insert option there, and one of the options I have is insert columns to the right, so that would work also. And then the third way I have of doing it is to go up to my Table Tools ribbon and this Layout sub-ribbon, and in the Rows and Columns group I have an option here to insert columns to the right. So as we're here, I'm going to use this one. And there we go, I now have a new blank column. And you can see that it's had to shuffle a few things along to make room for it. So a couple of other things have now been wrapped around onto the next line, but I'm not going to worry too much about that at the moment. I'm just going to add a heading for my new column, a heading of total. And obviously we're going to calculate the totals in here using a formula in a later module. So now let's add in a row. And this time I'm not going to add one onto the bottom. I want to add one in between my 2 items here. So in between sticky notes and in between leather bound yearly planner. Now I could do this a couple of ways. I could either choose to highlight the sticky notes row, or I could choose to highlight the leather bound yearly planner row. So let's stick with this one. And again, let's use the ribbon this time. I'm going to go up to the layout ribbon. And you can see here I have a choice of inserting a row below or above, which is why I could have chosen either of these because I have the above and below options. Now because I have this row highlighted, I'm going to want to insert my blank row above. So I'm going to click Insert Above to get my new blank row. And as with the columns, I could have done that numerous different ways. I could have right-clicked my mouse and gone to Insert and done Insert Rows Above, or I could have used my mini toolbar and used the Insert Above option just here as well. So as always with Microsoft, there's always 3 or 4 different ways of doing exactly the same thing. So let's put in some information. I'm going to say 03/21/2019. Our item is going to be blue pens. Our stock number is going to be 1586. Quantity is 56, and the amount each is going to be 298. And there we go. So that's how you can insert rows and columns into an existing table. Next, I want to talk to you a little bit about how to format your table, make it look really nice, make it look engaging, and also how you can make parts of your table stand out, such as like the header row. So please join me in the next module for that. Hi again, this is Deb and welcome back to our course on Word 2019. We are working our way through Module 6 and we are now down to Section 4. And what I want to look at in this module is how to format your data in a table. So looking at this table that we've been working on in the previous modules, let's change a few things to make this look a little bit more engaging and a little bit nicer to look at. And looking at this currently, I can see a few things that I might want to change. So the first thing is in this header row, I can see that I have some text that's being wrapped round, so stock number and quantity ordered. So what I could do is I could just adjust these columns so that these are on the same line like so. And again, these can sometimes take a little bit of fiddling around with. And I don't think I need quite as much room for item name. So there we go. So they're now all on one line. That looks a little bit neater to me. So still focusing on that header row, I want to make it stand out a little bit. And I can do that by just adding some formatting to the text in the header row. So once again, I'm going to select my row and I'm going to make some changes. So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to center all of my headings. So I'm just going to go up to the paragraph group and click on the center align button. And I'm going to make these headings bold. And I'm also going to change the font to something else. So let's see, what shall we use? And I'm going to choose Cambria. Now you will notice that with certain fonts, some fonts are a little bit bigger than other fonts. So again, you may have to do a little bit of resizing of the columns. But I think in this case, I'm actually going to make the font a little bit smaller. Just take that down to, let's say, 10. And I'm just going to make a minor adjustment just here. Now, did you see what happened there? Look, as I click and drag, it's just dragged that cell border out. Now, that was because I only had one cell highlighted when I started resizing that column. So let me just undo. And I want to just drag the whole column like so. There we go. I think that looks a little bit nicer. Now, a couple of other things I'm going to do here is I want to center align these stock numbers. So again, I'm just going to highlight the cells that I want to center. So I'm just going to highlight those three. I'm going to use my center align again to get those into the middle. And I'm going to do exactly the same for quantity ordered. So select those cells and just align to the middle. Now with these amounts, I'm going to do something a little bit different because you can see I've got these three amounts in here, but the decimal points are not lined up. Now we spoke about this a little bit before when we were looking at tabs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a decimal tab, which means that these will all be lined up wherever the decimal point is. So I'm going to go up to my tabs in the top left-hand corner. And I'm looking for the decimal tab. So I'm going to cycle through just by clicking. And there we go. There is my decimal tab. And I'm going to just place it just there, like so. And you can see now that those figures are lined up with the decimal points. That looks a little bit nicer. Now let's go up to the design ribbon on our Table Tools contextual ribbon. Now, a couple of things I want to highlight to you in here. The first one is this big group in the middle, this table styles. If you click the drop down there, you have various different formatting that you can apply to your table. And as I hover over, you get a live preview. And you can see that the majority of these contain what we call banded rows. So that means that you have a white row in between a colored row. And you can change that if you want to. I'm just going to select this table style just here to add a little bit of color into my table. And you can see what's also part of that table style is that it makes everything in the first column bold as well. And again, if I didn't like that, I could just go in and I could make a modification just by turning bold off like so. Now, as I was saying, you have banded rows in here. Now, if I wanted to change that, I could go back to my Table Tools design ribbon. And in this first group, we have some table style options. And you can see whichever you have ticked is what you currently have active in your table. So I can see that I have a header row, which is correct. I have banded rows turned on, which is correct. And if you remember, my first column when we added the table was in bold, but I manually changed that. So if I don't want banded rows, I can just untick and it gets rid of those banded rows. And I can tick to add back in. I could also do banded columns if I wanted to and turn off banded rows to get a different look and feel. For this particular table though, I actually quite like just the banded rows. To the other side of this table styles group, we have options for controlling the shading. And we have our color palette in here, and we also have a wider color palette underneath more colors. So if you wanted to make some minor adjustments to the colors that you have on this table, you can do that from here. You can just highlight your row or your column and make the color change. So you're not stuck with just the table style that you've selected. You can go in and modify that if you want to. And we're going to look at shading and also border styles a little bit more in the next module. Now let's jump across to the layout ribbon and see what we have in there. Now I'm going to select my entire table just by clicking on the crosshair. And what we've got in here there's some things that we've already looked at. So this row and columns group, that's if you want to add rows or columns into your table. And you also have delete options in here as well. So if you want to delete individual cells, or you want to delete columns, or even the entire table if you want to, you can do that from here. You can also do things like split cells or even split the table. Now let me show you what I mean by split table. I'm going to highlight this second row in here. Now this isn't going to make too much sense, but if I click on split table, it essentially will split it wherever I've highlighted, and you'll effectively then have two different tables. Now I'm going to undo that because I don't want that to happen. And you could also, if you wanted to, split cells. So if I had one cell here where I've got blue pens and I wanted to make that two cells, I could say split cells. I say I want to split this cell into two columns and keep it as one row, and click on OK. And I now get two columns within my row. And of course you have the opposite of that. If I highlight both of them, I have a merge cells to put that back as it was. So a few useful options just there. Now auto fit just next to it. This is if you want to auto fit the contents of your table. So you can either auto fit it to the window or you can auto fit it to the fixed column width. And you can also make really granular adjustments to the height and width. So you can set the row height just here and you can set the column width just here. So you can really kind of customize that as to exactly how you want it to be. Now these two options here where we have distribute rows and distribute columns, you can select a column or the whole table or just a row. And this will just allow you to make everything even. And then moving across to the next group, we have some vertical alignment tools. So this is quite nice. If I wanted to vertically align everything in my table, so again, I could select my table and I have a few different options here. And I'm going to say I want to align them center left. So when I click this, you can see now that they've been aligned within their cell. So these ones don't have any room to go up and down, but this one down here is now showing in the center of that cell. So that can be quite a nice option. If you've got quite wide rows, you can make sure that the text is exactly in the center of that particular cell. And you also have text direction at the top here. So let me just show you how that works. I'm going to highlight my header row. I'm going to say text direction. And there we go. I have it displayed in a slightly different way. It looks a bit strange on this table, but there might be some instances where you actually find that useful, particularly if you've got a lot of items in your table. I'm going to undo that. You can also change the cell margins. So if you want to have a little bit more space around each cell, so space between the edge of the cell and the text within it, then you can define your cell margins in here. Now, I'm not going to do that, but just be aware that that option is there available to you. So those are a few of the options that you have with regards to the design and also the layout. Hopefully that makes you a little bit more familiar. We are going to dive into some of these in a little bit more detail over the preceding modules. So next, let's do that. Let's jump into how you can add borders and shading in your tables. So I'll see you in the next module. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our course on Word 2019. We're down in module 6 in section 6 now, and we're going to be talking about borders and shading. Now, we spoke about this briefly in the previous module when we were looking at creating tables. And if you remember, what we noticed when we inserted or created a new table in our document is that Word gives the table borders automatically. So let's just remind ourselves of that. I'm going to go up to the Insert ribbon. I'm going to go down to Table, and I'm going to insert just a 3-row table. And I'm going to click. And you can see automatically we have these black borders around the outside of this table. And what you have in Word is that you do have the option to take those borders off completely or add different kinds of borders. It's also worth remembering that currently, in the state that we have this table, these borders will print, but you can also turn them off if you don't want them to print at all. So let's take a look at some of these border options. I'm going to highlight my entire table just by clicking on the crosshair. And I'm going to go up to my Table Tools contextual ribbon onto the Design sub-tab, and you'll see that the last group here is the Borders group. And we have a little drop down here called Borders. And you can see that some of these are already activated. So where we have the green highlight around the outside, that means that it's active on the current table. So you can see here I have bottom borders turned on, top border, left, right, so on and so forth. And if you want to turn these off, you can just click on them to deactivate them. So if I click on bottom border, you'll see now that that bottom border disappears. Now, I actually don't want to do that, so I'm going to turn my bottom border back on. Let's go back up into that drop down. And what you'll see is an option here for no border. So I'm just going to switch to that. Now, even though we've selected no border, you can still see quite a faint dashed line. Now that's really just a guideline so that you can still type, you can still see the outline of the table, but this won't print. So if I was to print this document, the text is just going to look like it's in columns. You're not going to actually see those borders at all. Now, if you don't want these grid lines showing at all, you can also turn those off. So let's select our table again, go back to our borders drop down. And you'll see at the bottom, we have a View Grid Lines option. So I currently have mine turned on. So if I was to click it, it's going to look like there's nothing on the page. The table is still in fact there and I can still type. It just makes it a little bit more difficult if you can't really see where those columns and rows are. So what I generally do is I'll turn on grid lines, I'll create my table, and then if I don't want anything to print, any of the outlines, I'll just go in and take those grid lines off. Now I'm going to turn those grid lines back on so that I can see them. And I'm going to go back up to borders. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this option here, the outside borders option. And what you can see there is that I now have a border just around the outside of my table. So again, these grid lines in the middle aren't going to print. So all you'll see is a black border around the outside and the information in columns and rows. Now, what about if I wanted to apply a border around the heading row only? Well, it's just about where you make your selection. So I'm going to select my heading row. I'm going to go back up to borders and I'm going to say outside borders. So now I have an outside border around my heading row and also around the outside of the table, but I won't see any column dividers or row dividers in the bottom 2 rows because those are currently still just grid lines. Now there's lots of different options under this borders drop down. So you've got things like inside borders, inside horizontal bar, diagonal down border. So you can really have a little play around with those. You may find some of those are useful to you in your daily work. I'm fairly happy with how mine looks, but what I want to do now is to start adjusting the colors. Now in the drop down that we currently have, you can see that we don't have any options for setting the color, setting the style, or setting the width of those borders. So we're going to jump into something else to do all of those things. And to do that, I'm going to go all the way down to borders and shading at the bottom. And it takes me into this dialog box. And what you'll see here is we have 3 different tabs. We have borders, we have page border, and we have shading. And we're going to explore all 3. So I'm going to click on borders first of all. And you can see here we have different options that we can select. So box border, all, grid, so on and so forth. And we can also select a style for our border. So it might be that I want a double line border. And this is where we can change the color. So I'm going to change this to a dark blue. And I'm going to make the width a little bit thicker. So I'm going to make it to 1.5 points. So now that I've set these options, if you look in the preview, it's showing me what it's going to look like if I click OK. So around the outside, I'm going to get that blue double line border. If I didn't like that, so maybe I just wanted to apply it to the top and the bottom, I can click on the 2 side ones in this preview area to remove those borders. And when I click on OK, you'll see that's what I get. So you really can customize it from within there. It might be that I want a completely different style for the left and right borders. So let's jump into there again. I'm going to highlight my table. I'm going to go to borders and down to borders and shading. And this time I'm going to have, let's have a triple border. I'm going to say I want this in purple and I'm going to make it a little bit wider. And then I'm going to go to my preview and I'm going to specify that I want this border on either side. So I'm just going to click and click again. Click OK. And there we go. So quite easy to customize, and there's so many different combinations of options that you can use for your borders. So it's definitely worth having a little play around with those. So next, let's talk a little bit about shading, or the fill color. Now, when we say shading, what we mean is the color that's going to appear in the background of the cells. So again, let's go into our borders and shading. And you can see here the 3rd tab is the shading tab. So currently I have no color selected. Now I can go in here and choose a fill color from the color palette, and that currently will apply to my entire table. Now I actually don't want to do that. I want to have a different color shading in the header row to the other 2 rows. So I'm quickly going to cancel and just modify my selection. So I'm going to select the top row, or the header row first of all. Back into borders and shading. I'm going to go to shading and I'm going to choose a light blue color. Now underneath there I have a couple of little drop downs for patterns. So if you don't want a solid background fill, you can go in here and you can change the gradient or the transparency, either lighter or darker. But if you scroll down, you also have different patterns that you can use for your background fill. Now, in general, I don't tend to use these because I find that if I'm typing text over the top of a pattern, it makes that text really hard to read. So it might be good in some situations, but if you're putting text in there, I would sort of stay away from really adding patterns into your background fills. Now I'm just going to keep mine on clear, which you can see in the preview is just going to be that true blue color that I've selected. I'm going to say apply to cell, so that's going to be all the cells that I have highlighted, and I'm going to click on OK. And there we go, I have my background fill. Let's do the final 2 rows. So I'm going to click to highlight them. And you probably get this by now. Back up to borders and down to borders and shading. I'm going to jump across to shading and I'm just going to choose a light. Actually, let's do, no, that's fine. Actually, let's do a light green color and click on OK. And there we go. Now, I'm sure when you're doing this, you can make it look a lot nicer than the example that I have here, but hopefully that's inspired you a little bit to have a play around with those shadings, those border outlines. One last thing I want to show you before we finish up this module is the 3rd tab in that group that we've been looking at, and that is page border. So let's jump back to our design ribbon, go to borders and down to borders and shading. And we're going to select the middle tab this time, Page Border. Now this is if you want a border around the outside of the entire page. And again, you have lots of different styles in here that you can choose from. You can set the color, you can set the width. So if you just want a dotted border or a dashed border or something like that, double lines, then you can do that. Set the color and the width. But you also have an art drop down at the bottom. And this is where you've got some kind of cool stuff in here. And again, you have to bear in mind the kind of document that you're doing. If it's for a business presentation or something quite corporate, then I wouldn't necessarily recommend putting these little jokey page borders in. But if you're doing something fun like a newsletter, then these can look quite nice. And again, there's a whole host of them. The more professional looking ones tend to be towards the bottom. So again, it really does depend on what it is that you're trying to do. Now, just for this demonstration, I'm going to select just something that's reasonably fun. Let's do these palm trees. And I'm going to click on OK. And there we go. You can see I now have my palm tree page border. So we've looked at borders around a table, we've looked at shading, and we've also looked at page borders. The final thing I want to show you is how you put borders and shading around text. So not in a table, just regular text. I'm going to switch back to another document that I have open, which is Smith Flyer Edit. And what I want to do here is I want to put this title, I want to put a border around it, and I also want to put some shading in there as well. So as with everything, we start with making our selection. And up on the Home tab in the paragraph group, we have borders and shading options here as well. So I'm going to click the border drop down. I'm going to jump into borders and shading, and I can choose any of these. So let's do a 3D box. And I'm going to change the color. So let's make that, let's do red. And I'm going to make it a little bit wider. And I'm going to click on OK. And I could, if I wanted to, also put some shading in the background there. So I'm going to go to more colors because I don't like any of those. They don't really work with my red. And I'm going to pick quite a dark color in here and click on OK. And there we go. Now, did you see what happened there? Because I put a dark colour in as the fill, Word has automatically made my text white so it stands out on the background, which is very, very helpful. The final step here is I want to put it in the middle, so I'm just going to choose the Centre Align button, and I'm also going to make my text a little bit bigger, like so. So just be aware that not only can you utilize the borders and shading options for tables, you can also put them on any piece of text, which is a really good tip to know when you're designing your documents. So that about wraps it up for borders and shading. Let's continue with section 6 and talk about sorting the information that you have in your tables. So I will see you in the next module for that. Hello everyone and welcome back to our course on Word 2019. We're all the way down in Module 6 of Section 6 now, and this is where we're going to start talking a little bit about sorting your data in a table. And there are a few different ways that you can sort information in a table. You can sort alphabetically or numerically. So let's take a look at how we can do that. Now, this table that I have here is in the document Sorting Data in a Table. And what I'm basically tracking in this table is first name, last name, company, address 1, city, state, and zip code. And I want to run a sort on this table. Now, when we say sort alphabetically, you can either sort ascending or descending, so A to Z or Z to A. You can sort numerically, so 1 to 10 or 10 to 1. And you can also sort by date if you have that information in your table, which I currently don't. Now, before you start to perform your sort, there are some guidelines that are really important that you're aware of. You need to make sure your table is set up correctly before you perform your sort. And you must have a header row on the top of your table. So you can see here I do, it's in a slightly different color to the rest of the table. And in order for Word to recognize that you do have a header row on your table, then your header row has to be different to the information that's below it. So you can see here my header row is in bold and it has a blue background, but the data underneath the table in the main body of the table isn't in bold and doesn't have a background. So I would suggest making this header row slightly different to the information below. You could even go as far as to change the font if you wanted to. So let's change that to Calibri to make it completely different. So that's the first step. Make sure that your header row has differences from the rest of the information. The next thing you need to do is you want to make sure that your mouse is clicked in the column that you want to sort by. So in this example, I want to sort this list by last name. So I'm going to make sure that I'm clicked somewhere in the last name column, and I can then perform my sort. So I'm going to go up to my Table Tools contextual ribbon. I'm going to go to the Layout tab, and in the data group on the end, you'll see we have a Sort button. So I'm going to click on Sort, and I have a few options, and we're going to be exploring or using all of these, but first of all, I'm just going to do a simple sort. Now when I click the drop down, you'll see why it's important to have Word pick up that header row, because what it's done is it's put all of those column headings into this drop down list so I can choose which one I want to sort by. Now I want to sort by last name and its text, and I want to sort it in ascending order. And I'm going to click on OK. And you can see now that my table has been sorted into alphabetical order by last name. Now let's do this a slightly different way. I want to sort by last name and then first name. So I'm going to go back up to Sort. I'm going to sort by last name in ascending order, and then I'm going to sort by first name in ascending order. And I'm going to click on OK. Now, there wasn't too much of a change there, if any at all, and that's because I don't have any duplicate names in here. So once it's sorted by last name, we're then saying sort by first name. Now, if I had two Arkins or two Fergusons, what it would do is it would sort by the last name first, and then it would look at the first name column and sort those into alphabetical order. But because I don't have any duplicate names in this data, you're not going to see any change. So just be aware of that. So with that in mind, let's sort by a column that does have duplicates. So we're going to take a look at this state column. And you can see in here, I have a few options which are the same. So I have two Connecticuts in there. I have a few New Yorks. So we do have some duplicate values. So I'm going to use this column to sort by first of all. So I'm going to click in that column. I'm going to go to Sort. And this time I'm going to sort by state in ascending order. Then I'm going to sort by last name in ascending order, and then by first name, and click on OK. And now if you look at the state column, we have all of the AR states at the top. So we've got Arkansas, we've got Arizona, and each of these have then been sorted by last name. So if we look at these top two just here, for Arkansas, we can see then that last name has been sorted into alphabetical order. But because there's no duplicates here, the first name isn't in any particular order. This is also highlighted if we go down to New York, where we have three names in here, or sorry, four names. So we've sorted it by the state. We've then sorted it by the last name. So these are going in alphabetical order. But because there are no duplicates here, then these names are not in any particular order. Okay, so just be aware of that. So that's pretty much how you can sort in a table. So a couple of really important points there to remember. The main one being make sure you have your table set up correctly and that header row is different from the data beneath it so that Word knows that you want to use those headers as your sort fields essentially. Hopefully that gives you a little bit more of an idea as to how you can sort data in a table. We're going to proceed with section 6 now, and we're going to talk about drawing our own tables in the next module. So I will see you then. Hello again, this is Deb and welcome back to our course on Word 2019. We've made it all the way down to module 7 of section 6. And in this section, we've been looking at tables. Now, what we're going to do in this module is I'm going to show you how you can draw a table. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, why on earth would I want to draw my own table when we have lots of other utilities for inserting tables? Well, sometimes you might like to create a table that doesn't necessarily fit the traditional rows and columns design, that traditional grid structure. So I have an example just here of a table which is outside of the norm. And what we're going to do is we're just going to look at what we have in this table. Then we're going to recreate this table, and I can show you how you can draw it, insert the picture, and get it looking exactly as we have here in this example. So what we have here is basically an outside border. And then on the right-hand side, we have a picture of a tiny home that I've just inserted. And on the left-hand side, this column has essentially been divided up. So we have a row at the top here where it says tiny house for sale. We then have another row that's actually been divided into two columns for the address and the price. And then we have a final row that contains a little bit of information about the tiny home. And whilst you could achieve this by just inserting a regular table and splitting columns and things like that, it is a lot easier just to draw the table instead, which is what we're going to do in this example. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new blank document. So I'm going to go to File, I'm going to go to New, and I'm going to select Blank Document. So let's just jump back to our tiny home first of all. So the first thing I want to do is I always like to start by drawing the outside border. I find it easier to do that, and then you can go in and divide up the different columns. So let's draw our outside border first of all. So I'm going to go to the Insert ribbon. I'm going to go to the Tables drop down, and this time I'm going to select the Draw Table option. And the first thing you'll notice when you select this is that your cursor will change to a small pencil, which basically means that you're in draw mode. I can then just click and drag to draw my outside border, like so. So very simple. The next step I want to do is I want to divide this into two columns because I want my picture on the right-hand side and my information on the left. So if I look at my ruler, I can see that 3 is roughly halfway. So I'm going to just draw a line straight down the center. What I then want to do is I want to section off this first column. So I want to have my title at the top. So I'm just going to draw a line running across. I then want an area where I can put in the location and pricing information. And then I have my space at the bottom for the rest of the information related to the tiny home. Now, one more thing I want to do here is in this second row that I've got, I have the location and the pricing information in two separate columns essentially. So I'm going to divide up this one just here by drawing another line down the middle. So I basically have my structure for which I can now put my information in. So I'm going to start by typing in the title into this first row at the top here on the left-hand side. Now I can't do that while I'm in draw mode. So whilst my icon is still a pencil, I can't actually type anything. Now there are two ways that you can deactivate draw mode, and that is to go up to the layout ribbon and just click on the draw table icon, and that will deactivate it. Or alternatively, and probably something that's a little bit quicker and easier, just press the escape key on your keyboard and it will take you back to typing mode. So I'm going to type in tiny home for sale. And of course you can apply some formatting to this if you want to, so I might just want to align that across. I also might want to apply some basic formatting, so I might want to say have the title in bold and maybe make that a little bit larger. In the next box down, I'm going to say address, and that is 1 Forest Road. And we're going to say price is 223. And again, I might want to take these and align them in their cells. So I'm going to highlight the cells. I'm going to go to layout, and I'm just going to put those in the middle like so. And again, if you want to, you could format these. So I'm going to apply some bold formatting to the address and also to that price there, just to make them stand out a little bit. Now in this final cell just here, I actually have the information copied to my clipboard, so I'm just going to do a Control V to paste that in. And again, you can fiddle around with this if you want to, add some extra space in. If you don't like the bullets, you can take those off as well, so you can do whatever you want with the information in there. The final thing I need to do is just to add my picture into the right hand side. So I'm going to click in the column, I'm going to go up to the insert ribbon, and this time I'm going to insert a picture. Now I have this picture saved off to my local drive, so I just need to browse to it to insert it into my document. So I'm going to click on Pictures, and there it is, tinyhouse.jpg, and I'm going to select Insert. Now this picture is a little bit big, so I'm going to grab these resize handles in the corner and just drag it in a little bit. This can sometimes be a little bit fiddly. And we're going to take a look at inserting pictures in later modules. So if you're not sure what I'm doing here, don't worry about that too much. We are going to go through it. And there we go. Now I'm not quite happy with where that picture is placed. So with the picture highlighted, again, I'm going to go to my Table Tools Layout ribbon. I'm going to go to my alignment group and I'm going to say vertically align in the center, like so. And there we go. Very quickly, we've been able to draw our table and add in information and also add in a picture. And this in general is a little bit quicker than if you were to put in a traditional table and start having to split and merge cells and things like that. Remember, you also have the options for turning off borders, as we saw in the previous module. So if you don't want these borders to print out, then you can turn those off, or you could format these borders and make it look a little bit different. So you can customize to your heart's content. So that's it. Let's go ahead and wrap up this module. Next, we're going to talk about converting existing data to a table. So I will see you then. Hello again, everyone. This is Deb, and welcome back to our course on Word 2019. We're now down to Module 8 in Section 6, which is where we're going to be looking at how you can convert existing data to a table and make it a little bit easier to read. So what I have on the screen here is a document called Driving Directions. And if we take a look at this data, we can see it looks a little bit messy. It's quite hard to pick out the information that we need. So you can see here it says coming from the, and then we have from Portland, and then we have down here from the south, from the east, and from the west. But it's all a little bit jumbled and not organized particularly logically. And what we want to do is we want to convert this into a nice, neat table, which is going to make it easier for everybody to read. Now, when you're going about this, the first thing you need to do, or the first thing you need to tell Word, is how you want it to split up the columns. So I'm quickly going to turn on my show hide markers, or my non-printing characters, I should say. And I'm going to take a look at how my fields are separated. So if I look at this one here, North Portland, you can see that little arrow that we have, and we have a little arrow at the end of each of these. That is actually representing a tab key. So I can see here that my fields are separated with a tab. Now that's very important information, because what Word will do is it will take the input that you specify, so in this case a tab, and that's where it will break the column, or that's where it will give you a column. So just keep that in your back of your mind. We're going to be using a tab key to separate up this data. I'm going to turn off my non-printing characters, and I'm just going to highlight all of my text by doing Control A. I'm going to go to my Insert ribbon and back to my Tables drop down, and you can see we have an option in there for Convert Text to Table. And when you click that, you'll get this little pop-up box, and we have various different things in here. So table size, auto-fit behavior. You can basically ignore these top two sections. We want to jump straight down to where it says separate text at, and then we have a few different options. Now, as I said, our text is separated by tabs. So I'm going to say tabs, and I'm going to click on OK. And would you look at that? Word has separated this into nice columns. So wherever there was that tab character, it's put in a column break. So this looks a lot nicer and makes it a lot easier to read. Now, I haven't quite finished here. There are some couple of other adjustments that I want to make. So I might want to drag these columns or resize these columns just to make it look a little bit nicer, like so. I could then go in and I could make some adjustments to my header row if I wanted to. So I might want to apply some nice shading in the background. I might want to make my headings bold, so on and so forth. So you can format that exactly how you would like. One other thing is if I scroll down to the bottom, if you look in this last row, I have this information here, which is kind of all bundled up in that first column. And I don't really want it to be there. I kind of want this to be running across the bottom of my table because it's just for informational purposes. So what I can do is I can select my row like so. And if I right click my mouse, I have an option in here called Merge Cells. So when we click it, it's going to basically remove those column dividers and merge those cells into one cell. And you can see now that that looks a lot nicer. And you might want to go in and put in a little bit of space on the end and at the beginning. You might also want to do something like center this text, like so. So very quickly, we've managed to take some data that was kind of messy. We've split it up and we've put it into a table and we've applied some basic formatting to make it a lot easier for everyone who's looking at this document to read. And I think that looks really nice considering what we started with. So that's it. It is as simple as that to convert text to a table. Next, I'm going to talk to you how to work with quick tables. So please join me in the next module for that. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Word 2019. We've made it all the way down to Module 9 of Section 6 where we're going to be talking about quick tables. Now you may or may not have heard of quick tables, but they are a really good way of making your life a little bit more efficient when you're working with tables in Word. So if you can imagine, if there is a table that you use on a regular basis, you can insert it as a quick table and just edit the information. So essentially you don't have to recreate the table from scratch every single time. And you can probably think of instances where you've maybe wanted to use the structure or some of the formatting of a table and just modify the information slightly. And that is where quick tables are going to be your best friend. So let's first look at where we can find our quick tables and some of the inbuilt templates that we have access to. So I'm going to jump up to the insert ribbon. I'm going to go back down to table and you can see the last option here is quick tables. Now when I hover my mouse over, you can see that we have some inbuilt quick tables that we could use. So we have some for calendar, and if we scroll down we have a double table, we have a matrix, we have a tabular list, and we have some tables with subheadings. So you can use any of these. And if I just show you very quickly what they look like, I'm going to select this calendar too. So that will insert a little calendar. And then of course you can go in and you can make your modifications to this if you want to. So I can go in and I can change the month, so on and so forth. And all of your table utilities are still available to you. You have your table tools ribbon at the top and you have your design and layout options as well. So you could choose one of those inbuilt templates if you wanted to. Now I'm just going to delete this out. So I'm going to highlight it, right click and select delete table. I'm going to go back to my quick tables. And I just want to show you this tabular list. So again, if I just click the tabular list, and I might want to make some minor modifications to this. So instead of item, I might want it to say product. And instead of needed, I might want to say stock. And I could then go in and if I wanted to maybe change the fill color in the background here, I could do that. I could select my whole table and I could apply some borders to that if I wanted to as well. So as we did before, I might want to add a border around the outside. So what I'm trying to get across to you here is that all of the table utilities are still available to you in quick tables. You can modify this to your heart's content. Now that's all well and good, and I'm just going to delete out this table. But what if you have a table that you've already created that you want to reuse over and over again? What you can actually do is that you can save your table to quick tables so that it appears in that list, which makes it really efficient for you to reuse it. So it's kind of like utilizing a table template in a way. Now, in the previous module, we created a table for our tiny home. And I've actually copied that to the clipboard already just by doing a Control-C. So I'm just going to paste it into this document by doing Control-V. So there is the table that we created in the previous module. And this might be a table that I want to reuse over and over again, but I don't want to recreate it from scratch every single time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this as a quick table. I'm going to highlight my table by clicking on the crosshair. I'm going to go to the Insert ribbon, down to Table, and down to Quick Tables again. And if you look right at the bottom, we have an option that says Save Selection to Quick Tables Gallery. So let's select that. And what we're essentially doing here is creating what Word calls a building block, which is something that you can reuse over and over again. Now, I can choose to give my table a name. So it says Tiny Home for Sale. So I'm just going to delete out that last word. So it just says Tiny Home. It's going to save into a gallery called Tables. I could assign it to a category if I wanted to. I'm happy to keep it on General. And I might want to give it a description. So I might want to say Info. Actually, I might want to say Tiny Home Info. It's going to save it as a building block. And I'm just going to click on OK. All right, let's now delete out our table. And let's see if we can insert that from our quick tables list. So back up to Table, down to Quick Tables. And if I scroll through the list, there it is at the bottom. And you'll find that most of the time, the tables that you create, if you've saved them under the general category, they will appear at the bottom. So I can click on it and it will insert my table. And what I could do is I could go in, I could maybe change this picture if I wanted to, change the address, change the pricing information, but I have that basic template there that I can reuse over and over again. So that is a great efficiency tip when it comes to reusing tables that you use frequently. So that is how you can utilize quick tables. We have one more module in this section, which is working with formulas in your tables. So let's flip over to that and I will see you shortly. Hello again and welcome back to our course on Word 2019. We've made it all the way down to Module 10 in Section 6, so we're almost done with our Tables section. And the final thing I want to go through with you in this section is how you can utilize formulas in your tables. Now, if you've ever used Excel, you're probably familiar with that terminology. But if you're not, what we mean by a formula is a mathematical calculation which can maybe add up some numbers or maybe find out the average or subtract or multiply. You can do all of those things in Word. There is a major difference with Word though to Excel, which I'll show you as we go through, and there's some really important points to highlight as well. So let's start out with this example that we have on the screen. So I have a Word document here, and you can see that I have a table for top music categories, and we have our categories listed out. So pop, rock, country, soul, R&B, and classical. We have our in-store sales, our online sales, and currently we have our total sales column and our total sales row blank. So what I basically want to do is I want to add a formula into this total sales, which is going to add together the in-store sales and the online sales to give me my total sales. So how do we do that? Well, let's jump up to our Table Tools contextual ribbon. Let's go to our Layout tab. And in the data group on the end, you'll see you have a button that says Formula. And if I hover over, you can see the screen tip. It says add a formula to a cell to perform a simple calculation such as average, sum, or count. Now, again, if you haven't used Excel, those terms may not be familiar to you, but they're pretty simple once you get into it. So let's click on Formula, and we get this little formula box here. In this first field up here, we have formula, and Word has put in a formula for us. So it's kind of looked at the data in the table and predicted what formula we might want to use. And in this case, it's actually correct. Now, again, if you're not used to using Excel, this might look like a completely different language to you. So let's just break this down so you understand what we're looking at. So first we have the equals sign, and this is something you need to put in whether you're in Excel or Word, and all it does is it tells the application that you're writing a formula as opposed to just some regular text. So equals will always come first. We then have sum, and sum is a function, and that basically tells the application what it is you want to do. And in this case, sum means add together or add up. And there are over 200 inbuilt functions that you can use to do all kinds of different things. But for us, the sum function is the one that we want to use. And then in parentheses, we have the word left. Now, if you are an Excel user, this is where it differs from Excel. If you're used to using Excel, normally what you have in the parentheses are the cell references that you're trying to add up. Whereas here, it just says add up whatever is to the left if it's a number, essentially. And that works okay for me because I do want to add up any numbers that I have to the left of where I'm clicked, so I'm fine to keep that as it is. I can then choose my number format. So how do I want it to be displayed? Now, I want my total sales to kind of match the format of my in-store sales and online sales, which is this one just here. So I can see that it's going to be a number with a comma and then the rest of my number, which is basically what I have down here. So I'm going to select that as my number format, and I'm going to click on OK. And there we go. It's added together my in-store sales and my online sales. So this is where we have another difference with Excel. If you're working in Excel and you put a formula into a cell, you can drag the formula down and it will paste that formula downwards, which is a really great efficiency tip. Unfortunately, in Word, we don't have that functionality. So we have to go in and we have to apply that same formula everywhere we want to add it, basically. So I'm going to go back up to formula. Now, look at what it's done here. It now says formula equals sum, which is correct, but instead of having left, it's got above in there. So Word has recognized that there is now a number above where I'm clicked, and it's saying, okay, do you want to add that up? And again, this is incorrect in this case. So I want to double click, and I'm just going to replace it with left because I'm still adding the numbers to the left of where I'm clicked. I'm going to select my number format, and I'm going to click OK. So let's do that for the remaining two. So back up to formula. Again, I want to change this to left, select my number format and OK. And the final one, up to formula, switch above for left, select our number format and OK. So there we go. It's a little bit more time intensive than if you were working in Excel, but the result is exactly what we want. Now I want to do something similar for the totals at the bottom. So in this total here, I want to add together all of the in-store sales, and then I want to add up all of the online sales. So I'm going to do it in the same way. I'm going to click on my formula button. And you can see here now that is correct because I want to add up all of the numbers above where I'm currently clicked, so I can keep that as it is. I'm going to select my number format and click on OK. And there we go. Let's just do the same for online sales. So I'm going to click formula. I'm happy to keep it with above. I'm going to select my number format and click on OK. And there we go. So for the final one here, I'm going to do the same thing. So it could be total sales above or total sales to the left. It's going to be the same number. So let's go to formula. I'm going to keep it with above. I'm going to select my number format and do OK. Now it's also worth noting that when you do put a formula into a cell, as I said, you do have lots of different functions that you can use. So we've used sum because we're adding up, but in this paste function, there are lots of other different functions that you could use. So you could do an average of some numbers if you wanted to. You could do a count, which will count how many numbers you have. So there's lots of different functions that you can use. So just be aware of that. Now, the final thing I want to point out, and again, this is very different to how Excel works. Let's say I go into my pop rock category and I need to change this in-store sales amount to, let's say, 4,000. Now look at the total at the bottom here when I tab out of this cell. It doesn't change. So this is a big difference between Word and Excel. In Excel, this number would update automatically to reflect the change that we've made, but it doesn't do that in Word. What you have to do is go back in and recalculate that formula. So I'm going to click on my total, go to formula, make sure it says above still, click on OK, and then it will update. Now, because I've changed this number, I also have to update this number just here because it utilizes this number. So I'm going to have to go back to formula and click on OK. And then I have to change this total amount as well. So back to formula, click on OK. So I've had to change it in 3 different places. And if you've got quite a large table, that can get quite confusing. So just be aware that it's not exactly the same as Excel. You do have to make those manual changes if you make any edits to your numbers. So that's it on working with formulas in your Excel table. We're almost finished with section 6. The only thing we have left to do now is a practice exercise. So I will see you then. Hello everyone and welcome back to our course on Word 2019. We're down to the section 6 practice exercise where I'm just going to get you to have a little practice with regards to the skills that we've learned in this section in relation to tables. So the first thing I'd like you to do is to open the file called Module Practice 6, and you can use this as your example to work from. And then on a blank document, I'd like you to insert a table that has 5 columns and 4 rows. I'd like you to type the data into the table as you see it in the practice file. And then I'd like you to insert a row above the row dated the 5th of the 10th, 2016. I'd then like you to add the data 6/12/2016, majestic sky, number 5151, 6, and $11.25. I then want you to format the table using any one of the table styles. You can also go in and format any of the data in the table as you see fit, and finally save and close the file. Awesome guys, you are looking good. I will see you in the next section.